And a lot of people who have been betrayed wrestle with that. Because after all, why should we want to? Why should we want to deal with the trauma, the pain, the mess of trying to rebuild a relationship of trust? Notice I said, why should you, not can you? Any of us can trust again. Any of us. Trusting is simply a choice that we make. But it's a choice that can be very difficult to make in the aftermath of betrayal. Because after all, we're hurt. Who wants to hurt like that again? We're angry. Who wants to have all of those feelings of anger inflamed again? Why should we trust again? Now, let me say that I do not mean to imply this morning that if you have been betrayed, you should trust the person who betrayed you to the degree that you trusted them before. Whether you should or not is sometimes a very complicated question. But I know this. Sometimes, maybe even a good number of times, we need to be able to trust the very one who betrayed us again. And certainly, we all need to be able to trust someone again. We need to be able to trust a lover again, a friend again, a boss again, a co-worker again. We need to be able to trust a family member again. We need to be able to trust. But why should we put ourselves through the trauma and difficulty of learning to trust again? That's the first question. It's the question that precedes how. And that's why. And I'm going to suggest there's one compelling reason why it is that we should take the risk of learning to trust again. And I would state it this way. Trusting other people is the only way to live the good life. It's the only way. If you want to have a good marriage, you've got to trust. If you want to have a good family, you've got to trust. If you want to have a good circle of friends, you have to trust. If you want to be a part of a good church, you have to trust. It is an inescapable component of truly living the best life and the kind of life that God has for you. It is an impossibility. Think about this. It is an impossibility to move through life successfully unless we move through life trusting other people, particularly key people in our lives. If we don't, we can't do life right. Can't be done. I remember when I was a freshman in high school and I went out for the football team. I figured I pretty much knew how football worked because after all, I'd seen them do it on TV. And I saw big hulking people running at each other at full speed, and they'd get up and laugh it off and go back to the huddle. And I lived with this assumption that whatever this equipment was, it protected you from feeling any pain at all when you played football. And I remember the first day of football practice in the middle of August. We were doing a tackling drill. So here I am as a freshman already, and I've got a ball in my hand, and I'm going to run at this person, and this person's going to tackle me. The person I was running at, as I remember, was 7.5 feet tall. He weighed about 300 pounds and was obviously on steroids. And I remember that I ran at him, and he was going to tackle me, and he literally grabbed me, and he picked me up, and he body slammed me to the ground. It all was in slow motion. I remember being picked up, my arms pinned to my side. I remember seeing the ground approaching me. And no lie, I remember thinking, it's okay. Your helmet will protect you. I'm not kidding. I thought, it's okay, man, you got a helmet on. And back then, we didn't even have air helmets, right? We just had a piece of metal with some pads in it. And that ground came up, and literally the first thing to meet that ground was my face in that helmet. When I came to a couple of minutes later, with a horrible headache and a slight concussion, I found myself afraid of contact. When I practiced again a couple of days later, and I would be running at someone and they were going to hit me, I wanted to shy away. I wanted to turn my head. I found that when I was running around the end, I wouldn't want to go out of bounds rather than hit contact. When I would go across the middle for a path, right when the ball was coming, I'd look to see if anybody was there. Because you know what? I simply didn't trust that I would not get hurt again. And because I did not trust that I would not get hurt significantly again, I became a horrible football player. I certainly didn't do any good for myself out there, and I certainly did not help my team. Because in order for me to move through a play in football, in order for anyone to move through a play in football, you have got to trust that somehow you're going to be okay. You'll get up to play the next play. Consequently, that whole freshman year, I got almost no playing time whatsoever, nor should I have. And I remember my sophomore year, you know what, I just determined I'm not going to play football like this anymore. And I remember the very day and the very moment when we were doing yet another tackling drill. And right across from me to tackle me was Gary Daub, I remember his name. He was our most ferocious linebacker. And I remember waiting for the whistle to blow and saying, "This is the moment." And when that whistle blew, I took off at Gary. And I gave him a little head fake, so he figured I was going to try to run around like normal. And when he went for that fake, I put my head down and I planted it right there with everything I had. And I knocked him back a good 10 feet. And then when he laid there on the ground, I stood over him and said, "Yeah!" Oh, it felt so good. Because I had to do something to know, you know, it's okay. You can trust this again. And once I learned to trust that I could be okay, I began to play football better. I began to contribute. I began to help the team and myself be successful. Look, you cannot play football without a measure of trust that you'll be okay. And you cannot play the game of life without a certain measure of trust that you can enter into relationships with others and be okay. If we want to have a meaningful life, if we want to have a joyful life, if we want to have a life of significance and influence, if we want to fulfill our God-given destiny, we must trust again. We must. So how in the world do you go about that process of re-entering a relationship of trust? Maybe with that very person who betrayed you, because you know that's just what I ought to do. Or how do you go re-entering relationships of trust when it's just like trying to trust someone again? A friend, a coworker, a boss, a family member, a church, an organization, a company, whatever. There is no way that I could provide for you everything you need to know to do that, even if I knew everything you need to know to do that. Couldn't. And I'm not even going to pretend this morning that somehow I have an answer for all of the nuanced facets of your re-entry into trusting again. But here's what I do know. I know that the Bible, God's wisdom given to humankind, provides some powerful insights that are a part of every one of our game plans in order to re-enter into trusting relationships. And I want us to take a minute and discover what some of those are. The first one I would simply put this way: trust God supremely. Trust God supremely. Now here's what I don't mean by that. I don't mean trust that God will never let you get betrayed again. Because that's maybe a little naive, and God never made that promise. I'm not saying trust God supremely, that God will not let me get hurt again, because God never makes that promise. And you may not.